Thanks everybody for coming, and Dr. Parrish, this was, you were the perfect intro for my talk because I love dead things too. I've got photos of dead things. So as Kaylin said, my project is, it's one of science education. And yesterday, one of the things that seemed to be missing from a lot of the talks was never actually mentioned was passion. Then this morning I came in and the very first presenter mentioned passion. And I have a lot of passion for science. I went to the University of Oregon, studied chemistry, realized that chemistry is really, really not that much fun to become a chemist. But luckily with that, I can do tons of different things. I actually was a terrible scientist because I'm not detail-oriented at all, but I love science, I understand science, and I'm able to communicate science, I think. If at the end of this presentation you disagree with me, then that's fine. So I've been going to Antarctica for 4 years, as Kaylin said, and what I want to talk to you today about is ways to communicate science in a compelling manner. I've definitely learned how not to communicate science in photography because I've shot some really terrible photos that I thought were really good and that I thought I was supposed to, because there's a huge amount of really terrible science photos that are a part of really good articles about science. And hopefully my project doesn't have that problem. One of the most important things that we do if we're going to communicate science is it's important that we follow the rules of science. And that is that we don't bend the truth. Science is very fact-oriented. So we can't necessarily, we can introduce a little bit of opinion, but it's really important that that opinion does not change the facts of the science. Because no matter what you do, if your facts are wrong, nothing else matters. Your whole project is done if you don't get the facts correct. And it drives me crazy to see both sides of that. Anybody gets the facts wrong, the whole project can be counterproductive. So how do we get people to pay attention to our science, to our documentary, to our cause? Well, what a lot of scientists who don't work with really amazing animals like to refer to as charismatic megafauna. Mostly, I think, because they're jealous because they don't get to work with these animals. This is a great way to capture our audience. And pretty much any photo you shoot of these things is going to be pretty interesting and capture the attention of our audience, right? Penguins, yeah, any picture you shoot of a penguin, people are going to be like, "Whoa, penguins!" Right? And that works. This guy, I was working on the sea ice with some scientists, and this guy just popped up in the hole. And my lens is literally, it was a 14 millimeter lens I shot that with, and I was just a few feet from him. And so these images capture attention. But even when you got a seal with a bag over its head, that captures attention too. But what do you do when you don't have baby seals, baby charismatic megafauna? By the way, the baby charismatic megafauna is the nuclear option. If you're really not catching anybody's attention, just put the baby in there, right? This guy ruined my lens for the day. Came all the way up to the lens. My last photo was an out-of-focus photo of this thing actually sticking its nose on the lens. And in Antarctica, that's pretty much done lens for the day. Have to switch out. That seal's less than 6 hours old, probably. So I told you to see some dead photos. Here's a dead one. as good as baby seal photos are at telling us about the life cycle of seals, or at least capturing the attention about the life cycle of seals, my personal opinion is a dead seal is a much better way of doing that, because the Weddell seal lives most of its life beneath the ice. And in order to be able to breathe, a Weddell seal has to chew through the ice. They have to chew their breathing holes to keep them open. Well, a very interesting fact about Weddell seals is their lifespan is determined by how long their teeth last. Right? So once a Weddell seal's teeth are ground down to nothing, they can no longer chew through the ice. So they either freeze on the surface or they suffocate beneath the surface of the ice. So think about what message, what thing you're trying to portray, and shoot that, not necessarily always the baby seal, right? So what are we going to do when we don't have science that people can easily relate to? They can relate to seals, they can relate to penguins. But can they relate to scientists? Right? So in this case, I was trying to tell the story of some scientists who are studying a microscopic organism called pteropods. Well, pteropods are the basis of the food chain. Right? They're tiny little snails. Why are pteropods important? Well, one, they're the basis of the food chain, but ocean acidification is causing those pteropods the shells of those pteropods to basically dissolve, just as Dr. Parrish was saying. In Antarctica, the food chain is very small. You go pteropods, krill, some fish, and then Weddell seals. You lose the pteropods, you very quickly lose the seals. But these guys don't care about the seals. They're only doing the science on the pteropods. And the reality of this photo is it's really boring. If this is the only photo I produce with a piece on pteropods in Antarctica, well, it's not super effective. It's not going to capture attention. But a couple days later, I went out to their sampling hole, and it turns out that seals, due to the fact that chewing ice is actually quite difficult, are also opportunists. So anywhere there's a hole, even a sampling hole, every 20 minutes you're going to get a seal to pop up. And so you can actually tell the story of the life cycle and the food chain very effectively while still capturing the attention of your audience by this, which was affectionately referred to as a delay in science. Because when a seal pops its head up in Antarctica, you can't disturb them. You have to leave them alone and let them go about their work, unless you have a permit in order to bother them, right? So they just have to stop doing what they were doing, and while they were doing that, I was shooting photos, hopefully that captured attention. But Antarctica has very little wildlife. There is no land animals in Antarctica, right? Everything's related to the ocean, and the vast majority of Antarctica is ice. So how do we relay that in interesting ways? Right? This is what a lot of our science looks like. And although this photo does explain the science, it's still kind of boring, right? It's not super interesting. And eventually, you're going to put the scientists to sleep. And that's not necessarily a good thing, right? So the internet age, we have really short attention spans for our audience. So we need photos that really capture our audience attention right away. And that's what I've tried to do with this project on Antarctica. Here's another photo that, although tells the story of what was going on, I personally find really boring. And I may be able to use this photo, but it doesn't tell a story, right? And and what we do is about storytelling. So my first trip to Antarctica, I was lucky enough to work with some scientists working on the Mount Erebus volcano. And if anyone's seen the Frozen Planet series, the BBC series, those are the caves, those beneath glacier caves that were shown in those documentaries. And this is one of the caves that BBC did not get into. We were able to go, my job was to take scientists into caves that have never been entered before. BBC was able to enter 3 caves. We entered over 20 caves during that 2-week period to sample soil and try to figure out, again, they're looking at bacteria, not a super interesting thing. But I was working with them both beneath the caves and then up near the crater of the volcano. So how do we get a more interesting image than this? What I did was I stepped back from them a little bit. Rather than be right in their face, I kind of stepped back and look at the whole picture. What is going to actually tell the story? And not only were they studying the bacteria in the caves, they were also looking at the gases, the concentrations of gases coming out of that volcano. And it was probably a week into working with them that I realized this is how I tell it. I step back and I watch what the scientists are doing. And then I start shooting from a little bit farther back. And this photo really tells everything I needed to, right? Concentrations of gases. We've got 3 scientists who are looking into the crater of this active volcano, which, by the way, every now and then will burp and throws rocks in the air. And what are they looking at? What are they being drawn into? Well, this volcano also has one of the only permanent lava lakes of any volcano on the planet. So they're looking down into a bubbling lake of lava. Kind of awesome. But it's a really difficult thing to shoot an interesting photo of. So we can draw the text into that with this photo. Also following the scientists around, I'm the one getting them both in and out of these caves. If you think talking to scientists about their research is difficult, you should try getting scientists in and out of technical caves when they've never touched a rope or put a harness on before. It was interesting, but a lot of fun, right? Unfortunately, I like to refer to Antarctica as blue and white. There's a lot of Antarctica that is just blue on the top, which is sky, and white on the bottom, and there's a straight line in between, right? It's an ice cap for thousands of miles. It's the size of the United States and Mexico combined, and the vast majority of it is ice. So how do you get an interesting photo of things like that? For me, I ended up going in the winter and using light to try and create interesting photos. What are these guys looking at? It doesn't really matter, right? But it's an interesting photo. It kind of draws us in. We can use this photo to really start to talk about any ice science there. This one too, I mean, here we're just drilling, we're doing some, these guys were doing some, well, pretty boring science in this picture, I personally believe. But it's an interesting picture. It really makes you question, what is this guy doing? Oh, there's a big active volcano in the background, and what is this really alien environment? And that's what I was hoping to show in this, by just kind of stepping back from the scientists. Other ways I've found to tell the story of their science is to tell the journey. Right? So to a lot of people, where they are and getting there is such a foreign concept. I mean, you've got to keep in mind that there's a large amount of the American public that never leaves their state. And they can't comprehend what getting on a C-17 and flying out of New Zealand and landing on a runway of ice is like. right? Oh, we land on a runway of ice at noon in the Antarctic winter. And you get off this plane, and it's, I think it was minus 30 in this picture. So, but these are great photos to really show how important the science is, because why would you do this if it wasn't important? Setting up camp in the middle of nowhere, as far as most people are concerned, and the trials and tribulations with doing that. What's it like to be dropped off in a helicopter with 4 buckets for your toilets and a few bags for the next 2 weeks at 12,000 feet on an active volcano? How do you poop? Believe it or not, that's one of the most common questions I get. It's like, where do you poop in Antarctica? Oh, you just go up there, you go to the little yellow tent that's parked next to the plane. That's basically what you do. People are interested in these things, and it gives you a way to start talking about the science. It gives you a way to start the conversation. And the journey doesn't have to be the whole journey there, right? A journey to get one sample can often be a really good story. So starting that story, in this case, we had to crawl through this. I'm super claustrophobic. And I ended up crawling through this thing, which was a first for me. But documenting that really helped tell a story of why these samples are important. People connect to people. And although the scientist may not be able to communicate particularly well themselves, you can show the human and the scientist with photography. Where do they live? What do they do? What is camp life like? Why do they do this? Why would they go to these places? Because camp life can be pretty grim, right? I spent a week in this hut with 2 other dudes. And each morning we'd go outside and we'd get a gasoline heater to heat up our propane so that the propane could heat the inside of this house because it was below, well, it was minus 45 degrees. And we found out the propane freezes at about minus 40. Right, but these images of life and these images of the people allow us to connect with the audience and talk about the science. Occasional portraits of the scientists themselves, just in their game, capturing their attention and saying, hey, just look this way for a second. Right when they're in the middle of something. And I've had really good luck doing that. This scientist works out of Scripps, oceanography, and he was on this volcano with me for 2 weeks, and really an amazing guy, and this was the last day we worked together down there, and this image really captures his personality, and it really, I think, connects with a lot of people. The next way I really like to capture people's attention is to show how grim things can be sometimes. Science doesn't always go right? So in this day, we left station, and by the way, it's really hard to shoot photos in bad weather. It's just, when it's that cold, it's really easy to just set the camera down and do other things and not shoot. But that's when you're going to get the best photos. And so last year when I was down, I really made an effort to shoot in the worst weather I could. And this day when we left station, the weather wasn't that bad, but after about a half hour, this is what it looked like. And so capturing photos of that. Obviously, it can be really cold in Antarctica. This is what happens when it's really, really cold and you're out for a while. Everything frosts over. And things are uncomfortable. If you can show that, it connects with your audience. Show failure, right? When things don't go as planned, you should go ahead and shoot photos of that. because it's important. Especially, it will create a compelling story, especially when you have to go back later and then there's eventual success. So even when things are as bad as they can be, you should try and tell that story too. Don't gloss over it. I found that abstract images of the science definitely helps, right? So what is this image? It captures your attention because it's interesting, but what is it? Well, turns out that these are nacreous clouds. These are the clouds where the ozone hole actually happens. These are clouds of nitric acid at the highest reaches of the atmosphere, polar stratospheric clouds. And they tell the story of some of the science that was being done this year. Right, here they are again, polar stratospheric clouds. But the science was being done in this little hut, right? It was a mass spectrometer that had been sitting there for about a month, just taking samples. And all they were trying to do was figure out where the natural depletion of ozone came from. Does it come from the ocean, or does it come from the ice cap? And I don't think I can show that. I can't capture the attention with this photo. But by showing pictures of those clouds, it captures the attention. And then you can tell the story of the clouds and then the science of the clouds and the chemistry that's going on there. And that helps capture the attention of your audience. And again, for sea ice, this image here has really resonated with a lot of people. This is only a crack this wide. It's just a different perspective of it. But it captures people's attention, and they say, what is that? And they immediately start asking questions about these abstract images, which allows you to start to tell them stories of the science. If all else fails, humor, right? Scientists do have a sense of humor, though all the ones I've worked with have great senses of humor. And even here, this is actually a very serious thing we're doing. We're whiteout training in Antarctica. It turns out that we barely needed buckets on our heads that day because the weather was really, really bad when we were training them. But humor helps. Humor will often, an image like this captures people's attention. Even this one, right? There's a little bit of humor there. Like, what's going on here? That's what the SEAL was wondering. He ended up with a bag over his head a few minutes later. Right, humor in our camp life. Camp life in Antarctica and a lot of field work is not quite what you want it to be. Yes, we did use the human waste bucket to brine the Thanksgiving turkey. We had no choice. And yes, we did eat it. And always capture a couple of embarrassing photos of the scientists themselves because you will definitely need that later to get back at them for something. Right? Photos like this are not hugely interesting. They don't really tell a story. But you shouldn't skip them. You should definitely try and shoot them. And so keep in mind that I've shot, my catalog is 20,000 plus images in the last 4 years in Antarctica. It's a huge number of photos. So your photos don't need to be boring if you're doing science. They should try and show a sense of the place you're in. They should talk about the journey, because these are the things that capture attention, right? Talk about the life. What is it like to be in the field? No, Metallica was not the first group to do a rock and roll concert in Antarctica. Lots of people every year do it. All right, talk about the failures. And then use some abstract images to try and capture attention. Because people will always ask questions. And as I said, if all else fails, use some humor. Most important, make your images compelling and interesting. Visually interesting images are going to be a lot more effective at capturing your audience and telling your story than boring ones. Don't change the nature of the science, right? Have passion. And hopefully we'll see more science education. My project is one of science education, and it comes because I'm super passionate about science and educating kids on science. So that's all I have for you. This is one of the current Blue Earth projects. Check out the website. Add me on Instagram. I put lots of photos up there when I'm down in Antarctica. And thanks a lot. I appreciate it.